Welcome to lecture number 3. We're going to discuss chapter 2 from Our Lives, which is entitled Power. Again, I'm going to trust you to read the material. I'm going to highlight some ideas and things. We're going to talk about some of the videos that are in the Blackboard area and some of the articles as well. So let's get into it. Starting in chapter 2, power. Okay, so in essence, what is this about? We're taught by our society that systems of power are natural. This is just the natural way of things. Men dominate women. The rich dominate the poor. One racial group dominates another racial group. Ideas like survival of the fittest have been used as sort of pseudoscience. And the power of the crisis of the moment to reinforce ideas that hierarchies are good and okay and natural. The idea of the way it is the best way, and any attempt to change that is somehow unnatural and a threat. And I think you can see in America today that any changes to how we think about race in this country is definitely treated as if it's the most scary, terrible idea that's ever bubbled up from, the hellfires below. But what I'd like to do is position you, as you read chapter 2, think, if you could, like going back in time. Okay, so at one point, you had nobles and serfs, and you had a power structure that said that this was okay, that it was natural. And you had the church saying it's okay and natural. Then you had master and slave relationships. And again, the church and the government and everybody said, education said, this is natural, this is the way it's supposed to be. You had colonialism dominating indigenous people. And again, the church and the government and everybody said, this is natural. And now, of course, we have ownership and capitalists and billionaires and we have workers. And we're told this is natural. If you could go back, would you tell the serf or the slave, hey, it's all a lie. You don't need a master or a nobleman. These are things that you don't need. This is just a system telling you the way that they think it should be to benefit themselves. And can you possibly see the potential lies in your own life today about messages that you've received about racial groups or poorer groups or people from other countries that tend to villainize them, that make the current system A-okay and the way it should be, and the people that are in privileged positions, that's natural. Our code word for this lecture is Guinness, the Irish beer that is imported to the United States. So, what vocabulary do I want you to pay attention to? Obviously, all of it you're responsible for, but cultural universals, make sure that we have a good understanding of this. Again, this is where sociobiology, our colleagues over there, go, hey, look at all these things that happen that couldn't have been learned, that may have something to do with biologically how human beings develop. Things like development of language and song and things like that. Know the looking glass self, mechanical and organic solidarity, subcultures versus countercultures, make sure you know the difference there, racial tracking, the concept of power for patronage. This is often where a minority group or minority group member feels like it's a good idea to basically play ball, accept the way that the hierarchy is because I'm getting something for that. So, for instance, I think we can just look to sports, collegiate sports in particular, where, accept these racialized ideas and that your value is just as an athlete, particularly for certain minority groups. And then, your only value to the system is that. But we'll treat you good, if you do this activity for us, and then both sides seem to sort of turn a blind eye. In your textbook, chapter 2, there's a short little breakout section called Becoming Black. That's important to look at because here you can see that for folks coming from different cultures, you can see how being, in this case, black or Hispanic is considered a plus or a minus for the individual experiencing, depending on the culture that they're in. The other one is single motherhood getting a bad rap. Again, this is a power idea that if a family doesn't look like we think it should, we tend to, as a dominant white, middle class, heterocentric, European-centric culture, view that, oh, well, that's bad. That's a bad thing. So just be aware of that. Now, I'm sure some of you might be asking a question. What am I supposed to get from all of these readings? Been doing a lot of reading. What am I supposed to get for that? Well, you need to be able to dispute and factor in the dominant culture's misinformation and lies. Because again, you're going to be the expert. You will have read the things that other people haven't read. They've been accepting the lack of discussion of race in this country as the norm and the way it should be. So, number one, the concept of race didn't happen by accident. It's not like classifying butterflies. It's an exercise in power. One group has the power of institutional knowledge, government, education, religion. And then they get to define who is okay and who should be in the dominant position. And using race, this was a way that they did it quite often. That this idea affects, number two, it affects individuals, how you're treated as a person in society based on your perceived race. And it also affects communities where whole groups of people are treated in a different fashion based on their perceived place on the racial hierarchy. Number three, non-dominant group members have to negotiate and deal with everyday things, everyday kinds of everything from microaggressions to perceptions, the kind of subtle, unperceived, often unwritten racism that's in society. And this is why it applies to several groups: racial and ethnic groups, disability groups, gender groups, age groups, poverty. It isn't natural. And by not having to deal with it, this is the basis of white privilege. White privilege, which we're going to get into in a second, basically stems from the ability to not have to deal with these things. As I'm going to talk about in a section, it's about all the things that white folks don't have to deal with, so then they don't see, so they don't hear the complaints or the critiques of society from minority group members as being valid, because they go, well, I didn't experience that. That must be made up. You must be making that up. You're too sensitive. You're whatever. So let's take some of the videos that are in the Blackboard section there of this section of our course. The first one is, I don't see race. I put that one in there basically as a humorous start and a critique of what I consider the sort of white liberal mistake that appears so very ridiculous. The one character goes, well, I just don't see race. Really? Your eyes not work? Have you been in an accident? Of course, we see race and color and height and weight. We see a lot of things. And to act like I don't see race isn't the white liberal achievement, which they sometimes want to try to make it. It's basically it's trying to absolve that person from having to deal with the racial and ethnic problems in our society and dealing with them honestly. One author I read one time basically said, the person who's basically an out front racist is more honest about it. They see racism and they've picked a side. And in a way, I think the whole ridiculous notion of I don't see race is basically, oh, I don't have to pick a side. And part of that is because I'm already in the privileged position. I'm white, so I don't have to see. Oh, I didn't know that person's black. Oh, wow, I'm so surprised. Then we have a longer video about white privilege. And some key concepts, probably the biggest concept is the concept of redlining. So make sure that you have a good understanding of that concept. Again, if you're questioning it, send me a message. I'll try to work harder to explain it. But back in it really became pronounced in the 1950s and 60s, where, like for instance, the GI Bill, this was given to soldiers that had fought in World War II. But it was only good in certain cities and certain neighborhoods. It allowed white soldiers to buy in the suburbs, but it didn't do that for black soldiers. It kept them in that part of the city that had been previously predominantly African American. It was basically used to thwart any kind of natural integration. It was also used to fuel suburban expansion. You see lots of things like colleges for whites, land-grant colleges and things like that benefited from white students. And HBCUs, weren't giving these kinds of funds to educate. That wasn't easily used. And over again, you see cities all over, not just in the South, in the North. The city of Detroit, there was a movie by Eminem called 8 Mile, and that's a real place. That's a real road. And on one side, the Federal Housing Administration, GI Bill, you could use if you were an African American. On the other side, you couldn't. That was for white folks. And that kind of thing happened all over America. And it reinforced the way that race was being done at the time. Now, it isn't always just a white and black thing. You see white privilege being recognized. Mexican Americans weren't allowed into, like, the University of Texas until the 70s. You see pushback in like Texas, California, against Mexican Americans as well as black. And that is a privilege that benefits whites, even if I wasn't the one doing it. I have to acknowledge that there was a benefit. There were places there in college, in housing, employment, that were for people that looked like me, that were white. And one of the things that we should probably acknowledge too is white privilege isn't all the time about what you got. I think that's often where white folks will say, hey, listen, I didn't get anything for being white. Why are you putting all this on me? Well, it's all the times that as a white person you didn't get pulled over. You weren't hassled by security at the mall. You weren't dismissed by some administrative functionary at a school, or a store manager actually heard your complaint and didn't dismiss you. It's hard for white people to see the things that didn't happen to them. And that makes it very difficult for white folks to acknowledge and to come to grips with, because it really is very much having to put yourself in somebody else's shoes. As an exercise in Anglo privilege and conformity, let's do a little quick exercise right here. As you're listening to this lecture, I want you in your mind to think of, picture in your mind, a typical American. Was that somebody that looked like Geronimo or Sitting Bull or Crazy Horse? Probably not. It probably looked like a European American. That is that kind of Anglo privilege that is woven through our culture. Other kinds of privilege are, when you hear a song in another language, or somebody speaking another language other than English, and that makes you angry or upset or annoyed, that's a privilege. It's a privilege to be annoyed. Yes. People in Europe hear other languages all the time. They accept other cultural languages being spoken all the time. But here, it's a sign of what we consider non-Americanism. How this can blend, I mentioned religion a couple of times. Let's do the same exercise. I want you to picture in your mind what Jesus looked like. Okay, picture in your mind Jesus. And if he had blonde hair and white skin and blue eyes, that's Anglo privilege and conformity influencing what we know as a person that came from the Middle East, someone that looked probably very much like what we see in the current issues with Palestine. So in your mind, if you didn't get a version of a Palestinian, this is what I'm talking about, where white privilege, ideas of whiteness are being constantly woven into our reality. And we're going to come back for part, we're going to go into lecture 4. All right?